Let's get to our regular panel now. David Gazzard from DPG Advisory. He's the director there, former Liberal advisor, and Ben Oquist, the executive director of the Australia Institute, formerly with the Greens. David Gazzard, let's start with you on this issue of the hospitals, the row over funding. Queensland, 4 code yellow alarms yesterday in North Queensland, none of them hit by COVID. This is a worry. In a state where the COVID numbers are low, they're saying they need a surge of federal funding. The federal government says they've been meeting their end of the bargain under the COVID arrangements.
Here we go again, Kieran. You can see why the Premier is under pressure in the newspapers in Queensland in particular for buck passing and excuse making. The thing that I don't quite understand is that all of this funding and all of the effort that's gone into fighting COVID has been done to flatten the curve. We're in a state where there hasn't been an outbreak of COVID in a serious way, and yet the hospitals appear unable to cope with just normal everyday health concerns. So you sort of wonder what the Queensland government's been doing over the last 18 or 19 months while everyone's been frantically scrambling to fix their health systems so that they can take excess pressure if it's delivered through COVID. 19 months in, it's suddenly all the fault of the feds again. This is from the same Labor government that spent over $2 billion in excess of what it's promised just to build up a payroll system for nurses. So it's got form on mismanaging the state. I watched what Greg Hunt had to say fairly carefully, and the feds have put close to 18% of GDP into support for the states across a whole range of measures, including health, while the states have spent collectively around 2%. So I think it's a fairly compelling argument that the feds have done their fair share of heavy lifting when it comes to bailing out the states in dealing with COVID.
Ben, I was just today having a look through that national partnership on COVID, the financial arrangements, which had 50% contribution for all COVID costs, and that's been ongoing since January of last year. The Health Minister adamant to me today, Ben, that will continue for as long as the pandemic is around. So it begs the question, why is Queensland in a situation where 4 of its big North Queensland hospitals are under such strain already?
Yeah, I think it's a trend that's happening around Australia. There's something else going on with our hospital systems and pressures coming on to them separately to COVID. I heard the ACT Health Minister, Rachel Stephen-Smith, speaking quite sensibly about this morning, saying that, well, because of a number of factors, some of which they don't quite know, but some of which they do, the freezing of the MBS rebate, more chronic conditions being presented at hospitals with comorbidities than previously, more mental health patients presenting, some difficulties getting people out of hospitals into an NDS system that's under pressure. I think there's a lot of pressures going on the hospital system that's separately to COVID. Then on top of that, of course, there's this worry about the big costs coming out of COVID as we play a kind of catch-up between all the surgery that wasn't done because of hospitals were preparing for COVID, or people put off getting cancer tests because of COVID, and that there'll be a big kind of catch-up to happen next year. So I think the states are rightly worried about that. I think it's interesting, though, the Prime Minister is being so hostile to the states. A lot of talk has been about how going to an election season, the Prime Minister is not going to be wanting to fight with premiers, but he's really gone out of his way. His language has been very robust, hasn't it? Saying that the premiers are angling for a shakedown and he's not going to be up for it. So there's something going on here that he's seeming to want to fight with the premiers on this. I'm really interested in what Perrottet does going forward, whether he's going to be in for the fight to get extra funding from New South Wales. And I think he's the one to watch from here.
He's in for a fight with Mark McGowan, that's for sure. Let's have a quick listen to what Matt Canavan said to me earlier. I asked him, is there any deal that Barnaby Joyce can do with the Prime Minister that he'd buy into when it comes to emissions reduction, particularly net zero? Have a look. You're very close to Barnaby Joyce. If he does a deal with the Prime Minister that gets the country to net zero, which has basically, like New South Wales has done, they're not making any change in policy. They've set that target. They think they're going to get there anyway. Is there any arrangement in which Barnaby Joyce agrees to with the Prime Minister where you'll get on board?
No, Kieran, I've said time and time again, I'm not for sale. I think the right thing for our country right now is to focus on rebuilding our manufacturing industries and getting ourselves stronger.
David Gazzard, so there you have it from Matt Canavan. It's such a contrast with the Nationals in New South Wales who've done that deal with such a vigorous, ambitious climate reduction schedule. He's not buying it.
Well, I think we've got to remember that Matt Canavan is a senator who's on the backbench and he is entitled to his view. He represents a part of Queensland where they have some strong views in the past and continue to have strong views around the future of that industry in his state, and he's going to stand up for them. The thing we've got to bear in mind, though, is that there are a range of other views that are forming within the government and within the National Party that are congealing before COP26 in the beginning of November. So from that perspective, Matt Canavan is a voice standing up for his constituency, and he's one of about 100 who's entitled to do that. But the government, the executive of government, will reach a decision on this. It's for Barnaby Joyce to bring his party together, and it's for Scott Morrison to lead the nation. So I've got no doubt a package is coming together with the government, and Matt Canavan is entitled to his view, and he should be putting his view. He should be putting his view very strongly, because that's what the people of Queensland expect of him.
The Federal Health Minister, Ben, we discussed COVID, but he also touched on this and said he thinks people will be very pleased with what they see, that a very promising set of commitments is emerging. So obviously he's aware of what's being discussed and was indicating that they're making progress, but they're clearly not going to bring Matt Canavan along for that ride.
No, David was being very polite about Matt, but Matt's an outlier. Of course, he's entitled to his opinion, but it's not his opinion. It's not an opinion that represents the people of Queensland, the people of Australia, or what our economy needs, or dare I say it, what the planet needs. And unfortunately, some of his language or kind of incoherence seems to infect Barnaby Joyce and his language, and we've got to get past that. The Prime Minister is going to announce net zero by 2050, but the proof will be in the pudding about whether there's actually actions to match it up and get Australia off fossil fuels. We shouldn't be listening to Matt Canavan. We should be listening to the Prime Minister of Samoa, who I had the good fortune of introducing at a forum today. And she says Australia, the world, has to reduce its emissions by half in this decade. And that's what Glasgow is about. She thinks we should get end all coal power. The real test is what action is taken in this decade and how to get off fossil fuels in the short term. Not net zero by 2050, that's not matched by action. The Prime Minister is going to do net zero by 2050. He is going to ignore Matt Canavan. But I don't think we're shaping up for a package that meets the urgency that the COP26 that David mentioned is requiring.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.